did you all manage to revise and realize what its main function is for? Yep, but don't use eyesight, use the word vision. Visual processing or for vision. Why? Eyesight is a very different thing. Yes, you can see with your eyes. So what you see, all right, it forms your like, okay, I have eyesight, so I'm capable of seeing. But that's only stage one. And there is no processing of the information. You are really able to see because of your occipital lobe and the extension, which is here. What do you call this? The temporal lobe. Temporal lobe deals with long-term memory, hearing. So we have hearing, also auditory processing, right? In other words, hearing, long-term memory. And it actually has a structure. What do I mean? Okay, this is going to be a bit beyond your syllabus, but I think some people might find it interesting. If we divide your temporal lobe into the, let's say, so this is the front, okay? So your eyeball will be somewhere around here. Now this is the front part, that's the back. So if we divide it into the front, the middle, and the back portions, you find that images and things, right, that are more modern, like maybe keyboard, laptop, the memory is housed somewhere nearer to the front part. But more primitive things, maybe let's say hammer, okay, despite it also being a tool, but it's considered more, it came about first, right, compared to keyboards. You find that it's stored closer to the back. So the temporal lobe, actually, temporal is time. It really has a timing thing. Okay? Somehow of course, you will have to learn other things and then you process that, hey, this is like very basic, oh, this is more advanced. And once it has been labeled so, it will be shifted to the correct shelves. In inverted commas, shelves. Whether it's closer to the front or closer to the back. Which leads us to one part which you can't see here. So it's situated on top of the midbrain. If you recall, it's called the thalamus. Now, last week I didn't go through in detail. I asked you to read, right? So don't worry. This recap will also cover the necessary. Now, somewhere, I think, Stephanie, I think you got the page. You should be able to see thalamus there, right? You want to show, okay, if I go to and fro, yeah, maybe, let's see if I can do this. But I'll search for the...
You can.
Okay, we found the page. So somewhere above the midbrain, this thing called thalamus, it is like a control tower. It is not the only one doing the work, but it is, what it does, its main function is to send off all the information to the correct places of the brain for processing. So once you've learned that, oh, the hammer, it's a very basic olden days kind of tool. So once you label it, let's say you're a child, first time you learn about it, and you know that, oh, this one compared to the cell phone, it's much older. And once it's smacked, the label is in, all right, this portion will then push it to somewhere in the temporal lobe, the correct places. So there is an organization. Otherwise, your behavior will all become jumbled up. Okay, I'll pause for a while so that some people are still feverishly writing notes. You can catch up.
Controlling information to where to store.
Okay, so thalamus, it sends off all the information to the correct places of the brain for processing. Storing is it's ambiguous because the thalamus is not the main thing dealing with storing. It does label it as this for storing. Then it will send to the correct part of the brain. But then there is another part of the brain that will deal with the storing. So I would say it's indirect. Okay, now we go back to that picture just now, the big one. Now, you are able to walk around, maneuver yourself in three-dimensional space. You can remember some kind of a map. So you have certain orientation to space. It's all because of this blue color portion. Parietal lobe. The parietal lobe, the cells inside, they help you maneuver around space. So the technical term is spatial awareness and spatial analysis. SPATIAL. I'm too far away from that board there, so I'll just spell it out for you. SPATIAL, space, awareness, and analysis. So if people suffer damage to this portion, you find that they will have a lot of problem remembering places, or maybe some old places they are very familiar with, they have no problem. Why? Because it's long-term storage, which is temporal lobe. So the temporal lobe may be able to assist, compensate. But fresh, like for example, if a person is seated here, and then you use the transcranial magnetic scope and you jam this portion, you find that the person may have problem trying to move to the toilet. Now, then you say, but it could be a balancing thing. But if we spare the balancing thing, the person is mobile, but they have problem orientating to the space, they will have difficulty moving around. So a lot of things we take for granted. If I were to throw this marker and then you catch it in midair, it's also partly because of this. You have to be able to process 3D information in split second so that you can react. Okay? So by now, right, let's leave the big thing to the last. So by now you realize all these three actually have to work together. So in natural setting, when you behave in certain ways, you have to look. So if you look at this, what's the color and what do you call this? What? Marker, but black marker. Actually, right, when it hits your eye, the shape of this is actually projected onto your retina. But when the retina sends the information to your brain, right, when it first reaches the brain, it is meaningless. You know why? When the information first reaches this portion, right, at the very tip, the optic nerve runs all the way back, but it doesn't hit this part first. It actually transmits all the way to the back, then the information gets processed this way. It goes back to the front. So when this part first receives the information, it will just note that there's something black, there's some vertical lines, some horizontal lines. So it's actually, so if you chop off a person's occipital or most of it and leave this small speck, they can't report anything. They will just report to you very black blotcher, some kind of a straight line, like slanted line, something like that. They have no idea what it is. So the cells from the front, more towards the front of the occipital lobe, must assist to decipher, right, break down and understand the picture. By the time the picture reaches somewhere near the edge, it would have this. It would now be able to perceive, as in you, right? Will be able to perceive the color plus the lines and merge the lines so that you can form this shape. But you still will have no idea. So now this part will talk to here and retrieve information and realize, oh, this is a marker. And maybe remember its function. So it'll tell you what it's used for. Okay? Now, then you are able to perceive the distance. Like you are able to see if a person, you can cut off this portion. And so suppose, right, Edwin is seated here. If I show Edwin the marker at this location, which is further away from him, and show him a marker closer to him, he wouldn't realize this is actually the same marker that has traveled this distance. Instead, he will see it as two markers. Because if you don't allow orientation to space to occur, it wouldn't be able to understand movement. Okay? So see, these three must talk together so that you can perceive the world and behave accordingly. But so what after you have perceived the world? Then here's the part. You got to do something, correct? Maybe you want to plan, if I throw this marker at you, you want to plan to catch it in mid-air. All this split-second planning. How fast is the marker flying? How fast should I move my hand? Okay? And what direction is it coming from? Will I be able to time it correctly? And prior to all this, you already planned, I want to catch that marker so I can piss Mr. Lam off, right? So even if I threw it, you plan to do it, it's all coming from here. So this front part of the brain, frontal lobe, it deals with something called executive functions. I think you know how to spell that, right? But what is executive function? That is a technical term. Yes, so that's one aspect. So when we look at executive functions, it simply there are more terms. I'll give you the main of it, the main few things. So the main few things under executive functions will be planning, not in order. So planning, anticipation, attention span, right? Forming motivations, abstract reasoning or abstract thinking, and decision forming. But this is what happens to all of us every day. Even if you talk about a simple thing such as eating a meal, you got to plan ahead what time you're going to have the meal so that it won't get in the way of maybe say work, correct? And then maybe you have certain preferences. So today you might want to eat noodle, but tomorrow you plan to eat rice. And when you eat, you might want to think, maybe today I should go with my friends. Okay, so suppose you are with two cliques. So then you need to decide which gang of friends you will join, right? So simple things we take for granted, they are all processed here at very almost instantaneously, split second kind of processing. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to catch the marker in mid-air if I threw it at you, right? So let's run through, and part of recap, we have just recalled the forebrain, right? We have recalled the surface of it, occipital lobe dealing with what kind of main function? Vision, yes. So visual processing. Temporal lobe deals with long-term memory and hearing, so auditory processing. Parietal lobe deals with good spatial awareness and spatial analysis. So the one big key word from frontal lobe, what is executive functions? But don't happily just remember executive function. Then you come to class for test and you got executed. Okay, please remember what executive functions consists of. All right, now.
Quick question. So
Yeah.
Because of the executive function and the planning and motivation and all of that, does that mean like people with like ADHD and all of that, their frontal lobe might have?
Actually, both frontal and extending all the way to parietal lobe.
They might have a.
They have a problem there.
Okay.
Overall, their nerves are already different. Okay, but we really don't have the information, the exact information yet. So far what we have covered is that there are some problems firstly with genetics. So the genes are not allowing some chemicals which you will come across later. So the dopamine and serotonin are not produced in their right amount. And the connection from this part to this part, right, the signaling is also off. So for them, they have a lot of problems sending the signals for processing properly over here. So they behave in a very different way. But by here, those of you who can't see, I'm referring to the frontal lobe. So, but when we do MRI scans for most of them, we find that it always occurs within these two portions. So it's something within the parietal lobe and the frontal lobe. And the problem is probably because other than nervous structure issue, all these nervous structures are also not producing the right proportions of neurochemicals. Okay? So what happened is in treatment, right, these children are trained using behavioral, either reinforcement or, well, we avoid punishment. But in very extreme cases, a little bit of punishment might be used, but they are always selected to make sure that it's painful, as in disturbing to the child, but not harmful. So with that, right, we are actually inducing other parts of it, still some parts of frontal lobe plus temporal lobe to come in to try and inhibit some of the signals here. So over time, they learn a so-called new habit, right? It's because other parts of the brain, through reinforcement and punishment, they are sending signal to modify the signals from the frontal lobe, thereby picking up a new behavior. Okay? Now, of all this that we've covered, you notice there's one little thing at the bottom. Can someone tell me, this one we did last week, can someone tell me what is the main function? There were two functions we talked about for cerebellum. Just tell me one of them. Come again? Balance and coordination. Now remember, cerebellum is not dealing with initiating balance. It's just fine-tuning the balance. So if you knock it out, probably the organism can wobble and struggle to move.
So does alcohol, when you drink alcohol, does that affect that?
Nope. Actually, alcohol hits the frontal lobe. We'll come to that shortly. All right. Alcohol affects the entire brain, but the first few parts that suffer is actually nearer to the frontal lobe. It's within the frontal lobe. I'll come to that shortly. So this cerebellum, it refines balance. It also deals with your motor learning. Remember? So remember I mentioned that if you have not picked out how to use a keyboard or play badminton, and then you suffer an injury to cerebellum, then very likely you will not be able to pick up those skills. Okay. So this is a simple, this chapter doesn't deal with so much details just yet. It's all at the surface telling you how your brain is related to your behavior. So since psychology deals with behavior, we want to know the various aspects of it. So when biopsych came in the 90s, they looked into all this, but initially it was looking at the entire physiology. So neuropsychology is a specialized part of biopsych, looking simply at the brain and the nervous system's correlation with behavior. All right. So now we have recapped a lot. We moved all the way down. Now, this thing called limbic system. Yeah. All right. Don't worry so much about all these septal nuclei, whatever. All right. The two most important points from here will be the hippocampus and amygdala. All right. So I will repeat that again. Most important thing from here is hippocampus and amygdala. So you might want to put a star there. Oh, sorry, then it will be 2 stars, right? Okay, what do they deal with? Let's go into the picture mode so that we can actually, thank you, Kai, so that we can actually, you can actually visualize where it is. All right, now, last week you might have seen a picture about the so-called drainage system in the brain, which was also colored in blue. Don't mix that up. Because part of the so-called drainage system runs around this portion. All right, so remember I mentioned something called the brain is bathed in a fluid, it floats. So this, during that picture, you see some parts over here also bluish in color. They are different parts. Because you're seeing this in 2 dimensions. Okay, it's a 2-dimensional drawing. So obviously a lot of things will superimpose and overlap. Now, this blue color thing here below, can you see, Kai? It's actually called the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is not extending all the way up to here. It's just where Kai has circled it. All right, the ones that extend upwards is already the so-called septal nuclei. We will ignore that for now. Let's just focus on hippocampus. Hippocampus deals with, okay, before I go further, right, I want to qualify one thing. Today, the world understands short-term, long-term memory much better. We actually would like to phase out this thing called short-term memory. But because it's so ingrained in everyone, it's impossible to remove because it's inaccurate. Now, some things you are only exposed to it for a fraction of a second, you can already make use of the information. Some things you have to be exposed to a few seconds before you can make use of them. So in that case, a few seconds would be long term compared to the fraction of a second, correct? But they are still called short term. So short term really is quite meaningless. Some things are 0 point something seconds, some things a few seconds, some things maybe up to 2 minutes, they are all still short term, right? So the range is so big, it's kind of useless to say that there's a short term. Those of you who read more about it, you might come across the word called working memory. So this is the part that we try to use to replace, but for the past 40 years, it was without success, okay? So right now, scientists decided that, okay, let's just keep both terms. And they use it interchangeably sometimes. And depending on the function they are talking about, they may selectively use one of them. So don't become confused when you read, oh, why is there working memory? How come it wasn't explained? Working memory and short-term memory are very similar, okay? Now, so hippocampus deals with short-term memory or working memory in what sense? What it does is it will store information for up to about 2 minutes. Then it must push the information to long-term storage. So where is long-term storage? You learned it just now. Temporal lobe. So it must coordinate with the temporal lobe to make sure you have long-term memory access. So that's one thing about hippocampus. Now it's not just remembering, holding something like a cache and then like computer cache, right? Cache memory, and then pushing it out. It doesn't. Because it will also need to retrieve information from long-term storage back into here to hold it so that your frontal lobe can process that information. So for example, if I ask you to do this problem sum, 130 plus 140, you actually need to retrieve 130, 140 from your long-term store, temporal lobe. Then it's held in the hippocampus for a few seconds so that the frontal lobe can do the processing, the addition. Okay? So if you say that, oh, it is only dealing with short term, then it pushes memory away. It's not. It will also be a librarian, retrieve the correct information for processing.
Is it like memory processing?
Yes, so far we know hippocampus deals with memory, right? But it is more than just a hard disk for storage, or at least a short-term hard disk. It also helps to retrieve. So what happens is once information reaches here, it's in the short term stored for a while. Then it is managed by pushing into the correct places in temporal lobe. It also helps you to retrieve correct information from the temporal lobe. So it's like a librarian now, right? So it's not only a shelf, it's also a librarian. Then what else it does? So this hippocampus, all right, it deals with working memory. So you can put there working memory is what? Exchange of long-term, short-term memory information.
There's a comment which says that the PC system derives its systems from the human brain.
Yeah, in a way, all right. That's how we make it easier for lay people to understand. Because if you ask those computer technologies, right, they will tell you that no, the machine can do certain things much better than humans. All right, but you know, when we first try to understand it, we usually try to draw analogies. So for people on that side, they will try to think in terms of human brain. For now, I'm trying to let you have another angle of trying to understand the human brain. It works like something you're familiar with. So hippocampus, I think for now, you just remember hippocampus for working memory. And to show you, what I'll do is I'll bring forward a video, all right, instead of leaving it to the last. I'd like you to watch this. You see what happens when hippocampus becomes damaged. Okay, let me do this off and I'm trying to see where's the video. You need this?
No, don't need. Yeah, unless you want to make yourself.
Mr. Lau, we can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Now, as I was saying, Clive Wearing, he's not the only one with a problem with hippocampus, but he and another guy, all right, HM, the initials, they are Henry, that guy, Henry Morrison. They were very well-studied individuals. In this case, Clive Wearing actually had a brain infection which destroyed part of his hippocampus. So take a look at his behavior, all right, with respect to memory. I think you can play, yeah.
I know what it's like to be dead now. Day and night the same, blank. No difference between dreams or anything like that, no senses at all. The brain has been totally inactive. No dreams and no thoughts of any kind whatever.
Clive was a renowned conductor living in London when he was struck down by a virus in 1985. Parts of his brain were completely destroyed, including his memory. However, his ability to play music is unaffected.
Do you feel different when you play music?
I've never heard a note since I've been ill. I don't know what it's like to play music when you're unconscious.
You played us some music about 2 minutes ago.
Not known to me. Totally unknown. I've never heard a note yet.
Clive's case became known to millions when a television documentary was made about him in 1986. Alone and confused in hospital, without his memory, the only person he recognised was his wife, Deborah.
What's been wrong? Can you just tell me what the illness has been? I mean, I really can't get to this.
But
I'm actually conscious now for
yes.
the first time. I just want to find out what the bloody hell they've been doing, what's been wrong with me. Because I haven't a fucking clue.
Well,
I've
this
never seen
is-
anyone at all.
20 years later, Clive only has a 7-second memory before his mind goes blank. What has life been like for Clive and his family?
do you know that we're making a film about you?
No, that's news to me.
You're being filmed for a television program.
Oh no! Oh, dear. Oh, I suppose I'd be posh, do I? Upper class.
Because you're very famous.
Oh, likely story. You're full of jokes, aren't you? Are you two laughing as well?
About 20 years ago, a film was made about you
Oh no.
just after you became ill, called A Prisoner of Consciousness. And 20 years on, we're making a new film about you. Because millions of people watched the film and wanted to know how you were.
Good heavens.
So millions of people know you.
How embarrassing. Ooh, they know too much about me now, don't they?
And we've been coming to see you for several weeks.
I see. Are you paid to come here?
Thankfully, we are.
Hooray!
Right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out to meet the sun. The Japanese don't care.
Clive is 67 and lives in a brain injury unit where he's under constant supervision.
But Englishmen at dust are siesta.
His wife Deborah lives 85 miles away in Reading. His illness has made it impossible for them to live together for 20 years.
So I'll pause here. I think you have caught a glimpse. All right. What can he do normally? Yeah, what can he do normally? Can you play the piano? You can play the piano? No, not him, you. So he beats you when it comes to playing piano, right? Now, some of us can't sing as well as him. I can't. So now think about all this. Then think of what did you see in the video that tells you that he is still normal? What was it? Other than playing the piano? He could laugh, he could interact with the people, he could remember his wife. So he is actually quite normal. But notice, the video told you that there is no way his wife and him could live together. So there are a lot of other things that probably would escape. Now, tonight, after tonight, you'll be able to access this from the Dropbox. You can watch the full documentary, okay? Then you realize why you need to thank your hippocampus and stop calling it hippopotamus. I hope then you can remember it, all right? Now, we go back to, maybe I'll go back to the slide. Now, the other important part is called the amygdala. We have, just now we talked about the septum nuclei, which is this thing. I don't want to emphasize over here. Instead, we jump. Now, there's something called mammillary body, but so this whole strip, right, from this dot here and this thing, I'm not going to emphasize. All right. So I'm going to emphasize on the hippocampus plus what is located. This is not drawn very well, but in front of the hippocampus, right? Now, by the way, the hippocampus looks something like this. It's not, from here, you only see like one thing, but it's actually what? The left and the right brain, they will have both. So it's like in the top strip, the septum nuclei, it seems like one strip, but actually it's just two very tiny rounded columns. And then it goes to the back, but once it reaches somewhere in the middle, it will start to split. So it goes from the back like that, and then it splits in two parts. So your hippocampus is one in the left brain, one in the right brain. At the tip of the hippocampus is an almond-looking shape kind of thing, okay? That, which is not drawn clearly here, is called the amygdala. So it has nothing to do with Star Wars or its queen. It's literally just almond-shaped, all right, object. So amygdala was Latin for almond-shaped, but this part is important. It initiates your feelings of fear. So amygdala, see, these are the functions. Amygdala initiates fear. It increases sexual arousal, and therefore it will affect sexual motivation. But don't go around thinking that, oh, some people are not so horny because they have a weak amygdala. It doesn't work that simply. But amygdala does affect the sexual drive. A damaged amygdala, most likely the human, the animal, right, they don't really want to have sex anymore. Okay? They can still be persuaded to, but they usually are not so keen on it. Then there's one more thing. It also increases sense of aggression. So without amygdala, usually you find the animal or the human very low in aggression. Now that doesn't mean that it's good. Like you say, okay, so we should reduce it. Because when there's too low in aggression, people cannot make proper decisions. What if you have a very imposing neighbor? We're not asking you to go beat your neighbor up, but you should at least assert yourself. And then if your neighbor plants all the way until the part of the corridor and up to your little staircase, you should at least tell your neighbor, please don't do this. But people with damaged amygdala, they may not have the motivation to even assert themselves. In animal studies, it's been found that animals that are territorial, right, they usually won't fight and be territorial when their amygdala is damaged. So they don't mind being encroached upon. As for fear, then I used a very specific term. I said initiate fear, correct? So maybe I use animal studies so that you can picture it. Because humans, the human fear is very complex. In rat studies, so we can control a lot of things. So that's simple. What they did was they put a cat, right? They give the cat sleeping medication, so the cat slept. Now, even though the cat is sleeping, if you put a normal mice into the cage, into the same cage, what do you think the mice would do? Would it go up and disturb the cat? No. They will be very wary. Okay? They may feel that, no, after some time that the cat is sleeping, so it's harmless, but initially they'll be very wary because they are afraid. However, right, mice with their amygdala damaged, they are just curious. Their curiosity has nothing to limit them. So straight off, they will go up to the cat, and some of the reports even say that the rats or the lab mice, right, they actually nibbled the ear of the cat. I mean, the cat was asleep, but they have no control, no limitation to their own behavior because there's no fear. But if you put them with a live cat and the cat got angry and swiped at the rat, then the rat will what? So the rat must feel a sense of pain. Threat is not enough. It must be life-threatening kind of pain, then it will start to display fear. So that's why I say amygdala, it initiates fear. But the internet will tell you all the nonsense and the bullshit and tell you that, oh, that is the seat of fear. S-E-A-T, a seat, which is incorrect. Amygdala does not control all your fear behavior. It only initiates the feelings of fear. So then people ask, so then the fear, all this fearful behavior come from where? Your temporal lobe, your frontal lobe, they all have to be involved. Because you could be afraid because of a past bad experience. So you need frontal lobe to give you that information. And the frontal lobe must then process and anticipate that there might be a threat or a danger. Then it will work with this thing called the limbic system, which is this whole thing that's colored here, to generate the feelings of fear. Of course, if it's necessary to initiate the fear, you will find that amygdala will fire off like nobody's business. Got it? All right. Okay, so you've learned two very important parts, very central to human behavior. Hippocampus deals with what? Memory. What kind of memory? Okay, technically we use the word working memory. It's really what? It's really short-term memory, storage plus retrieval of information from long-term storage for processing. Now that's why you appreciate, right? Working memory. Wow, so easy to say. Just one word covers everything. And then we also learn another important part, which is being distorted mainly on the internet, called the amygdala. Now, what is one of its functions? Initiate fear, right? Then you also heard about aggression and sexual behavior. So now, all in all, right, these four lobes that you've learned, we have a big term for it. So whenever people refer to these four lobes, they call it cerebrum. You see this term? Yeah. People don't usually call it by the name forebrain because forebrain is very unclear. Why? Forebrain was an old term that tells you that the latest part of the brain that evolved was this. But then, right, forebrain consists of what you've learned just now, the limbic system, which is housed inside, plus the entire cerebrum. So it's not really that clear. So by today, modern day, most scientists decided to drop, and just if you're talking about evolutionary term, they will tell you forebrain. But otherwise, right, they prefer to, if they don't want to talk about this what you saw just now is limbic system, is also known as the emotional brain, although that is more like a nickname. So most people who just want to talk about the thinking portions, they talk about cerebrum, which is what you've learned already. Make sense? Yep.
Sorry, I have a quick question. Is the limbic system, are the different lobes surrounding the limbic system, or is the limbic system in a particular lobe?
The limbic system is an entire structure called system by itself, and it's hidden within this cerebrum.
So then the lobes are
So if you look back at this, you notice this orange color thing is outside. So what they are doing now is they slice it open to show you. But the limbic system is really housed inside. So when you say the cerebrum, you really want to talk about here. This whole thing people can see when they go around, if you're talking about the inside. Of course, if you're outside, right, where everything is well covered, then obviously you won't see the limbic system. Okay? So luckily, we are already acquainted with this. So I won't repeat it again. Put a star on this slide. Okay, and of course, don't happily just remember the star and forget about the brain. Remember the star is to remind you to remember the 4 lobes plus their functions. And they are all here. And so all the wordy slides, I've explained them. It's meant for you to read, recap, and revise. Okay? Okay, it's explained. So now this is difficult to imagine. Damage to the primary visual cortex, which is your occipital lobe, right? The further back parts of the occipital lobe, you will find that your vision will have what? Will have blotches of blackened, like nothing there. Okay? So if let's say a person suffers damage to it, nowadays they are quite accurate on TV. Last time you find that people do all the drama, right? Then any knock on the head will end up blindness. Then later on, people learn, and they usually now depict people who suffer a fall, like slip, and then they knock the back of the head, and they end up with blindness. So it's more accurate. And this is essentially what's happening in real life. Any knock to usually the front part of your brain, and then your brain, right? So if it's a sudden acceleration, deceleration, remember your brain is just floating. So if you have a sudden movement like this, even though you knock the front, the force can be transferred to the back. So the back, because when your head moves, the brain is supposed to be floating inside. So when your head suddenly stops, the brain may go front, bang front part, and then the rebound effect bang the back part. So might end up still a bit problem to the vision, maybe lesser. So this kind of contracule injuries, you find that the back part of the brain may not be totally destroyed, but you end up without being able to see things. Okay? Now, so we also learn about temporal lobe. And here it's a clearer picture of the parts where it deals with hearing. Now, this is just a diploma level 1, so I'm not gonna show you all how it goes. In real life, if you read, right, sometimes people put in extra information. No need to become confused. What they are doing is simply they are expanding this green part here. All right, this green part, what they will do is it's actually like a target board. So they have the inner ring, which is this green one, and then there's extra rings on the outside. So the auditory cortex is actually much bigger. What it does is that the green part shown here, it deals with only the pitch and the volume. So you still cannot understand words and anything on. So once this part has processed all the volume, the pitch, it will send off to the next ring. So it's not shown here, but it will send off to the next ring. And this ring will then start to piece the rhythm together. Still cannot understand yet. Then it sends off to the third ring, where it will eventually piece everything together, and now music will sound melodious. Words will have certain words is just words. We take it for granted. We have nothing to describe it. But there's a certain tune, in inverted commas, to your words, right? Then this tune is compared with your temporal lobe so that you understand what the word actually means. Okay? So it's actually a very complex thing. It's not like your auditory cortex are therefore it processes sound, therefore you can listen. No. You might be able to hear the sound, but it's meaningless. It has to, a lot of other cells must be engaged. So in some books, they will draw you concentric rings. That's the reason, all right, to show you from simple to all the complex processing. Now, I want to focus on these 2 words, Wernicke and Broca. Basically, they assist the auditory cortex and temporal lobe to help you understand language. Yes, you need both to understand language. Okay, in a nutshell, I will describe them. Then I will show you some more words and then videos. It's difficult to understand Broca and Wernicke without watching videos. Broca deals with your speech production, which will include Grammar. Why? Because grammar, now I ask you this, can someone answer me? Even online people can, right? What is the difference between I eat durian and durian eat I? What? Mr. Lam asking trick question again? No. Okay. Now let's say let's look at this in simple English. Durian eat I eat durian. What's the diff? We are talking about. But how did you realize who is eating who? Because of the order of the words, correct? So there is actually a time sequence to the way we not only we use the words, but also to the rules we use. Correct? We all agree on certain rules. Like I eat durian, you know that it is a normal process, everyone can. Durian eat I is the end of the world. Okay? Because we already agreed on the grammatical rules. Broca's area deals with something we call temporal sequencing. The sequencing or the timing of how language is ordered out. Like, oh my God, now Mr. Lam has to switch to something technical, right? All right, temporal sequencing of language. So Broca's deals with motor production, how you speak, and also how you conjure up the meaning, because it knows how to arrange in terms of timing, in terms of sequencing. Wernicke helps you to break down the words and understand them. That's why, not surprisingly, Wernicke is housed in the temporal lobe itself, because it has to have quick access to memory. Otherwise, it breaks down the words, and then you will still have to take extra processors to go and retrieve. You will find that you are a very slow speaker and listener. So it has evolved to push into this portion, whereas motor production of words, right? Later you will learn why there's something, why this broadcast is also somewhere in the frontal lobe instead. Now, let's watch video now. I'd like you to read this before I play the video. So you're going to see someone with Broca's area damage. Okay, the behavior is clearer. Later on, you will find that Wernicke's problem is not so clear. Okay. All right. So I need to mute myself.
Can you tell us your name?
Mike Caputo.
And Mike, when was your stroke?
I was 7 years ago.
Okay.
And
what did you used to do?
Worked Autodesk, sales and worldwide, and very good. Yeah.
Okay. And who are you looking at over there when you turn your head?
That's my wife.
Okay. And why is she helping you to talk?
She's a speech.
So you have trouble with your speech?
Yeah.
And what's that called?
Aphasia.
All right. And so why don't you work now?
Islam cannot hear.
So he said phasia. It should be aphasia. But sometimes the sequencing problem also affects the word itself. So he dropped the A. Okay? And notice he stutters. It's not because there is a problem with vocal cords, like those usual stutterers. Instead, it's a problem of what? Send a signal from the brain, all right? The signals that is supposed to be formed in the brain, it's not properly formed. So when it reaches the vocal cords just tells you this kind of very unintelligible speech. Some people will say, oh, then why don't he write? I will talk about that shortly.
I do.
And what do you do now?
Voices of Hope aphasia.
And what is Voices of Hope?
Peterburg, and Dr. Hinckley, and
Okay, watch what the woman says after he gives all the keywords, all right?
and myself, founder for me, and I members the members probably 7.
Can you still remember the question? Okay, and he's giving a lot of keywords but never really linking them together in the usual way that we can understand them, right? So when finally people cannot remember anything, so here's what happens.
60 people.
So 60 people are part of Voices of Hope,
Yes.
which is an aphasia support group
Yes.
that you founded.
Yes.
And Dr. Jackie Hinckley is part of that.
Yes.
See? Okay? So when the sequencing is off, the certain words are even dropped off because in sequencing, right, you reach a certain order, then some of the it's not just order jumbled up. Sometimes the order have certain words removed. Okay? So without broadcast area, you will not be able to speak properly. Initially you will need some kind of assistance. So what speech therapists do is that they give people a lot of pictures to point to, important pictures like toilet, like food, so that they can still get on with life. Then later on, they pick up a bit here and there. And of course, speech therapists, neuropsychologists have to work together in order to get these people. By this time, the surgeons are out of the picture. They have stabilized the person and say that that's all we can do. All right? So then a lot of stimulation is needed in order to force the rewiring of the brain, those that can still rewire, and the rest will be on remedial. So they have to be assisted by other parts of the brain. Yes, if you read to them, they can. All right? They just cannot produce it. But this is because what? The Wernicke's area is intact. Now, just now I said, oh, what about then? Ask them to write. When they write, it's literally, yes, about, yeah. Somebody has asked the question, is this common with stroke patients? Actually, it is. The thing is, it depends. Most of the stroke patients who cannot talk, those stroke patients, right, with most of the time, 90% of the time, with a left stroke, left brain got stroke, they will lose the ability to speak, but that could be because of something you will see later. On the other hand, if the broadcast area is directly affected, then you find that sometime, usually about, if let's say, it really depends on the severity, but somewhere around first, second week onwards, right, they are able to start to speak again. But you find this kind of problem, then you realize, okay, so broadcast area was damaged. And what you've learned is that it's on the surface, right? But the stroke could be somewhere in the inside. So if I move my brain, okay. So if I move my brain, if I take out, so this is what you see, right? On the edge, the surface, and this hand signifies the inside. Now what happened is this portion, if I take out, right, and I turn and show you, the bleeding could occur here, and the bleed seeps until here, then it destroys part of the broadcast area, because the broadcast area is not just on the surface, it's about 6 mm thick to the inside. So if this eats a bit away, you still end up with broadcast problem. All right?
With therapy and everything, can you actually improve?
Improve, yes. Full cure, not necessary. Because some parts are so extensively destroyed, it's impossible to compensate anymore. Brain cells, they do regrow. Before 1995, the notion is that there's no way you can regrow brain cells. But actually they do. But the speed of regrowing is so slow that you may not achieve it within the time limit. Once you destroy brain cells, right, so later you'll learn that there are a lot of like wire insulation. The moment you destroy the brain cells, it's supposed to become hollow, correct? But this is dangerous. This means that all your signals will go haywire, and therefore the person will die even sooner. So in order to safeguard this, the brain evolved a mechanism to seal up all these holes. So once it's sealed up, right, the nervous pathway cannot connect anymore. So you must find another pathway. Stimulation can force the acceleration of finding another pathway, but it is not a controlled process. We like said last week, if we don't have a nanotechnology, we can't control this process 100%. So that's why we have to wait for the nanobots before all this stimulation can be given the next breakthrough. All right? When a doctor diagnoses a patient with brain damage, yes, it's a very broad word. Okay, it's actually a very broad word. You have to look at which are the areas. So usually from the CT scan, we will look at what areas are damaged. And then we will have a meeting, and then we will decide what are some of the immediate things to go in to do to not only increase the life expectancy, but later on, right, what we do might affect the recovery of certain functions. Then sometimes, of course, they will also consider if they go in to do certain surgeries to stabilize further, they might actually destroy more of the brain. So then they will decide and maybe give up on certain surgical procedures. But here's the thing, see, you are weighing the risk of losing the person's life versus you save the life and you end up with someone who cannot do anything. All right? And I think there was one more question from your side, right?
Just a concussion question.
A concussion is also a very big term. Concussion simply means a sudden hit to the head. But where is the damage depends on how you hit the head and whether there is also like maybe whiplash. So we have a immediate direct impact plus sudden deceleration on rebounds, and then we have an opposite side, what we call a contractile injury that can be damaged too. So concussion is simply a hit, but how much is the hit, where it hits, now that depends. All right. Now, okay, I'm done with this guy. I was talking about writing. I wanted to switch back to the slides. I just clicked the slide, right? Okay. Okay, so when they write, they will not put in the ... like this. They will usually have blanks, and they will also write in. Yep, because that's how the brain processes language after Broca's area becomes damaged. So you can ask them to write, it's useless. If you have something that you can make them draw, but drawing is tedious. So far, I have never seen a patient who will use drawing to help with communication after surviving a Broca's area damage stroke. Because by the time they finish, and you must remember, they have a lot of things to do, to work on before they can regain hand function. So it's very tedious to ask them to draw. It's easier to give them the chart, let them point, and then later on, if you see them write like this, it's because that's how the brain works. So you actually get like a new or a modified brain. All right. Now this is not limited to strokes. People who have a fall from great height, hit their head. People who go on some adventures, they accidentally have maybe firearm discharge, hits the head, and they survive. They can the injury may be at the site of Broca's area, and they end up with the same thing. Now let's look at Wernicke's then. We will watch the video of Wernicke's and then explain faster. But because I haven't clicked this right. Yep. So this is the side Wernicke's. On right? Okay.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment and talked with the people for them over there. They're diving for them at the moment.
It's 15 seconds through. Notice anything wrong with this person? That's correct. There's nothing wrong, or at least not noticeable. All right. Now listen. Okay, this is the feeling that a lot of Wernicke people give to others. The first 1 or 2 minutes, right? You will find that it's no problem. So if it's a patient seated there and you happen to be walking around the hospital, then you sit beside the person and you want to just chit chat to a stranger, and then this stranger has Wernicke. Initially, you'll find that, oh, what a great conversation. But let's listen.
I'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
We
get to
will
Juneau.
store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Right at the moment, they don't show a darn thing.
With the iPad that we were doing. Like here?
I'd like my change for me and change hands for me. It would happen. I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them.
Good.
This girl was very good and happy. And I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for us, other hands. I don't know what you get, but I talk with a lot of.
Does it make sense? Then you suddenly think, oh, shucks, I'm talking to someone with mental ill health problem. This is a crazy person who cannot speak. It is not. Notice a few seconds ago, he paused and he was trying very hard to understand the woman. He was trying to lip read. He was trying to figure out, right, from the hand signals, body language, what might the woman be talking about. The woman was talking about an iPad, but she wasn't pointing to an iPad probably. So he failed to understand that, and he thought that it was still the conversation about the place around. So he continued on that. Because now, is he deaf? No. If you do all the tone test, the sound tone, right? The person has no problem responding. So no deafness, but the brain refuses to understand speech. But they can produce speech if they can figure out what you're trying to say. All right? So can they still have quality of living? Of course. You just bring them around. All right? Let them participate in all those games and stuff. Then you say, but in that case, there's no stimulation. Does that mean that it will make it worse? Well, treating Wernicke's is harder than treating Broca's. So you can try to, the best way out, right, if you want to give them back quality of living, is actually to train them with lots of hand signals, with lots of pointing, to communicate with them through a lot of non-verbal assisted ways. So that's what we understand about things now. We realize, okay, there's this problem. We realize that, okay, we have limitations. We can't always help these people. Then how can we still improve their quality of living? So this shows you what another aspect of psychology. If we can treat, we treat. When we cannot treat, how can we continue to improve the quality of living? So that's still useful, right? Because if you look at biological help, it's you go in, you stop the bleeding, you patch up the person, and that's all. But quality of living may still not be great, right? So health is more than just physical. So that's what psychology is trying to do. Of course, we will have to work with speech therapists for this. Yes?
Yes, sir. It's not so obvious to me, for example, if I'm speaking to someone who has the damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
But over here, there are also people who, like, if I'm talking and they don't understand the second question, they might be able to answer that. So it's, how can I detect that they have this?
Actually, you cannot. The thing is, the presentation like this is very similar to people with schizophrenia, people with delusional disorder. But for the first 1 or 2 minutes, you can't detect. After that, there are certain telltale signs. For example, a person with Wernicke's problem, as long as they are not frustrated, they are always very frustrated because whatever they say, it doesn't seem to get anywhere. Same thing with Broca's people. Now, so let's talk about, let's remove the distractors like all these frustration. When they can actually converse with you like at a just pass level, these people, they will talk about Werner keys, right? They seem to be talking all over the place, but you will notice certain non-verbal signals, like they try to pause, lip read you, try to understand. If you increase your gesture, they tend to be able to get it, and they are able to converse with you, at least at a superficial level. You cannot expect abstract reasoning with these people. It's very difficult. Their brains are almost incapable of it anymore. Okay, so they can talk about events, they can talk about what happened, episodes, sequences, okay. But schizophrenics, delusional people, the content they talk about will have a lot of exaggerations, either exaggerating about fear or exaggerating about grandeur. Grandeur meaning, they are like full of themselves. They sometimes even think that they are working for God and these kind of things, or for the secret police, something like that. So the content of the speech becomes the telltale sign after a while. And for schizophrenics, then you start to find that there is a lot of incoherence to speech, because they jump from topic to topic, and sometimes the topic don't even link. And over time, the words may not even link also. Whereas you notice this guy actually speaks with what? Proper grammar, all right? And also when his words are chained together in an, well, it may not mean something, but it's supposed to be understood, right? So over time, we can tell the difference, whether there is incoherence, whether there is exaggeration, paranoia, grandeur. So this will tell the people apart. Initially, they're all more or less similar, okay? The thing is, first off, a person with dementia can also have Werner keys, because the dementia could have affected the Werner keys area. So for the rest of you, right, the question is, how do you differentiate a Werner keys patient from a patient with dementia? The thing is, it's not going to be easily answered like that. There are a lot of things we have to watch out for. So to keep the thing short, first part is, the person with dementia may also have Werner key. So in that case, the immediate answer is it's impossible to distinguish them. But a person with dementia, you will see two things depending on what type of dementia. One, maybe there's a lot of memory lapses. But for a person who tells you things like Werner key, just purely Werner key without dementia, they tell you a lot of things. They are able to remember a lot of things, even though what they tell you may not be towards the question that you ask. So in this case, it's only because they got the answer wrong, but their speech is still, all right, it's not like a gibberish of things. For a person with dementia, first off, there will be memory lapses. They can't remember things, all right? Then it depends on the severity. The next part is the personality of the person may also become off. So what you remember of the person, I mean, if it's a stranger to you, then it's a bit tougher. But you probably have to find information from caregivers. But if it's someone familiar to you, so this person may have very drastic changes in personality. So while they talk gibberish, they also flare up very quickly. And they seem to be more impatient than last time. And the flaring up, right, if you ignore them for a while, they start to become okay again. But the mood stability is far worse than someone with Werner key, but not in the initial stages when they are frustrated because they still can't get used to it yet. Okay? So there are always telltale signs, memory lapses, personality distortions, whether these are there, versus simply not answering your question. Okay?
So are these two damages, can it be seen via a CT scan or
No,
MRI?
you can't.
You can't see the damage.
Yeah, dementia requires
Werner key
and versus Broca, yes. Because fortunately, they are situated further apart. So a CT scan would be able to tell us which is more likely the case, okay? Jarin, I answer your question at break time, because this is way beyond what we want to cover here now. All right, let's go back to this. Oh wait, I need to turn off.
That's the slide. So, oh, you want to show the video? Video?
Maybe I turn off the video.
You just need to press this button.
Oh, okay.
You just hover over.
Okay. So this was what we covered, Broca. All right. Then speech problem, the video on speech problem. And then there's Wernicke, and then the video to tell me to play the video. So we are almost done. So in the so-called cerebrum or forebrain, we have what? Parietal lobe, frontal lobe. Okay. Now, last bit before we go for the break. If you take a look at the brain, maybe it's easier if I... Okay, if you focus on the brain picture here, you find that that's the left and the right brain. Don't become fooled by the picture. Now let's focus on the left brain, just this. I'd like you to focus on a very small strip on the somewhere in the middle of the cerebrum, extending from the temporal lobe. So this part is the temporal lobe, right? This one you learned this. So if we ignore this portion, just ignore this, go straight into the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe, you will see this colored part, the purple and or pink versus the blue. Okay. Now it all depends on the way you see colors. Some people will tell me this is purple, some people tell me this is pink. All right, but I'll use pink. All right. So pink versus blue. These two strips, they are very tiny strips. They are located on both your left and the right brain. What they do is that they deal with your sensation and your motor. Motor means your movement actions. So what exactly it is? Let's look at sensation first. That's why it's given the big term sensory motor cortex. Meaning, cortex means at the surface, right? So at the surface, it deals with sensation, deals with movement. Okay, now let's focus on these two strips. I'd like you to ignore all these lips, face on the repeated words for the moment. Let's look only at the blue color portion. This line here, which you see as central sulcus, so the moment you open the brain up, right, human brain, you will actually see a lot of deep lines. There are surface lines. Now, some of you are familiar with a picture of the brain. You see all these like twists and turns. There are literally all these gaps in between, but they are really very superficial gaps. The deeper ones, there are only like 3 or 4 deep ones. One of the very deep ones divides the brain front and back, front versus back. This very deep line, right, also separates the blue and the pink portion up, which immediately you can see that. So once you open the brain, right, you move away all the blood, you look at the brain, you see that deep, it's very visible, the deep gap. So once you notice the deep gap on the surface of the brain, then you trace like one strip of this thick thing, right? One strip to the back. It's actually this blue color thing. So this blue color thing on the parietal lobe, it's connected to various parts of your body. It has nerves extending to various parts of your body. And here is where you read them as which part is connected. Okay? So if we look at the face and lips, so if you decide to actually use an electrode, right, and probe at this portion, the person will tell you, oh, I feel a tingling sensation on somewhere here, where the lips and the face is. Because the blue part is actually the sensation. So you can create the sensation by actually touching the face and lips area, or if you are doing surgery, you open up the brain and keep the person conscious, and you use electric probe, right? And lightly zap here, so it doesn't cause damage. But the person will say, I feel it here. So meaning what? Every part of your body has nerves that map back to tell your brain what is happening on that location. And that is what this strip is about. Then it is housed in parietal lobe. Why? Because it will immediately tell you the the part on your body, 3D. How it orientates to the rest of the body and the space. Then, so it has quick processing of the information before passing it to the frontal lobe for planning and execution. Got it? Then you find that when the brain finally decides I want to take action, it sends the final signal is sent back, the command so-called is sent back to where it will move, it will be sent back to the specific locations and action will take place. So suppose you feel tingling over here. You are afraid that there might be some flying insect on you. So the signal is sent to here, it processes, and then it sends to this part, asks you to twitch your muscles here. So then this signal goes down to your thalamus, you learned it just now. Thalamus not only retrieves signal and send it to correct parts of the brain, it takes the signal from here and send it to the correct part of the spinal cord first. Then from spinal cord, it travels to this portion, and then you will start to twitch, smack yourself, so you get rid of the possible insect that could have flown to your face. Okay? So now we are complete. What you have learned is the various parts of the brain, okay? And the entire chain of process of how it orientates to space, to language, to vision, to listening, and taking action. So now it will send it back to the part where it will be the final portion to send to the correct parts of your body for action. So with this process, we can, of course, try to manipulate behavior based on it. Either you enhance the cycle or you disrupt the cycle. Got it? Question? Yeah.
Just one question about, you say, manipulate behavior and the response. In law enforcement, they use lie detector. So the lie detector trigger which part of the human brain? The accused?
It doesn't. Lie detector.
Say, okay, right. Whether it's telling lie, true or not true, but maybe only about 80%.
Oh, so high. Last I heard is only 70.
Yeah, I know. It's very complex.
Okay, maybe lah.
Lie detector. So which part of the brain that trigger off, and what's the
It doesn't.
like of fear or something like that?
Okay, so the standard lie detector or polysomnograph, this machine, what it does is it hooks on to measure your blood pressure, your breathing rate, your heart rate, and your skin conductance. That means the electrical conductivity underneath your skin. Now, no, they don't do that. That is the standard one. So that allows, hang on, maybe there's something, but hang on. This will allow lie detectors to detect 70% of the time. But 70% is very bad stats. So that's why they usually don't have all this admissible in court. They use it as a guide, but they don't admit the evidence. I mean 70%, can you imagine you send 30% of people to jail for nothing? Possibly so, right? That's a lot of people. So anyway, what this thing does is it doesn't do to the brain just yet. It does, measure various responses from your body. Why? So what they do is this. Before they start, they have the person strapped to all these things, breathing rate, the amount of sweat, everything. Okay, so strapped. They will ask you two questions. So for example, sorry, what's your name, please?
Alan.
Alan.
Yes or no?
Yes. So if let's say I ask Alan, you just answer yes. Okay? Don't choose another answer, answer yes. Alan, are you a man?
Yes.
Alan, are you a woman?
Also yes.
Yes. Now, obviously one of them is a lie, correct? Which one? Second one. But then it will be detected. When he says, yes, I'm a man, not only is the timing faster, the brain will also feel that it's consistent. So maybe you won't pick up from the heart rate just yet, but you will pick up from the skin conductance. Next, he obviously answered a lie. So the brain will process a bit longer and send a signal. So this may not be picked up by, again, the heart rate just yet, but it will be picked up by the conductivity. They will probably do this baseline check using simple to very complex questions and ask you to only respond in one way. So one of them is definitely a lie. With this, they start to map out all your various responses, not in terms of how you say it, but in terms of the amount of perspiration, the skin conductivity, the heart rate, the breathing rate, the blood pressure. All these are because what? Your brain is really processing the information either immediately or has to go through a lie. And therefore, it contradicts certain understanding about itself. So this then gets reflected. So that's how the lie detector works. If you train yourself well enough, your yes and your no will appear the same. Then the machine won't work on you. So far, Hollywood has managed that. Okay? In real life, I haven't seen someone done that. Okay? All right, so you go watch Steven Seagal. I think he also appeared in one of the movies with him being very calm about things. But it's possible to lie to the lie detector by remaining calm. If you want to do so, you got to first train yourself in mindfulness exercises, all those meditative exercises. Then it's possible to regulate all these little things plus your brain signals. All right, they have tried to use an EEG, the brainwave machine, but it doesn't work well. Brainwave machine is not good at all at detecting lies. Okay, so in the end, I mean that's what I heard about 10 years ago. They scripted, but who knows? Maybe if you report 80%, could be because they finally found a way to incorporate EEG into. I'm not a forensic psychologist, so there might be a breakthrough in that field. And if they are able to merge EEG with the polysomnograph, and then yes, it might push it. Otherwise, the stats is actually not astounding. It's always hovering around 70% truth, and then that's it. Okay, so I said one full circle, we understand. Oh, I can't, can you help? Yep. Thank you. So, oops. All right. Now, let's go for a break. Come back. We will finish up with what happens when your brain is weird. So what kind of behaviors will we be looking at? For this video, I think what happened is I will leave you to watch it on your own. It is actually a summary of all the parts. So it helps you in recap everything in 2-3 minutes. So it will help you tremendously, I believe, during your revision. Okay, so we'll skip this video in class. You can watch it as revision on your own. I see you in 20 minutes. Now it's, okay, so it's 8:30, I see you at 8:50. So, is this really true? I mean, we already know it's true. There is a left and a right brain. But is it really true that one brain does something and another brain does another thing? So if you want to try to have a breakthrough, you should train that one side of the brain when it specializes in doing something. Like now you know that, okay, left-hander, right-hander, right? We all know that the signals cross. In Broca's and aphasia and Wernicke's area, they are located on one side of the brain. For people who are right-handers, so your right hand, it goes to your left brain. If your left brain is, so you're more dominant, right? If you're right hand, so if you look at me, this is my right hand. So this is my left side. So the left brain is more dominant. 90% chance, if you're a right-hander, your Broca's and Wernicke is housed in your left brain. So therefore, you should, always expose to that side, because that side is the only one that deals with words. The other side, nothing, no words. So then you become a linguist. That's what some of the things say, correct? All right. First, we need to understand the basic parts. There is a surgical procedure called commissurectomy. This is actually a split brain surgery. So how does the brain got split? Because if you look at the picture, I forgot I got this. So if you look at the picture, and if I use the mouse to point to you, although this arrow shows you this, right, but actually this whole lightly colored thing is the corpus callosum. Then you say, but isn't this like somewhere the hippocampus, the limbic system, the all those things, why all smacked together? You are looking at it from a two-dimensional view. So what happens is, like I said, there's a lot of superimposition. So we have the thalamus there, but we have also what? The septum running just on top, and then we have the corpus callosum right here. Then surrounding would be so if you look at it from this angle, so we have thalamus, we have the septum the hippocampus, septum nuclei, turn to the front, then you have corpus callosum. So they're all smack there. And then you have the limbic system around it, then you have the cerebrum around it. Okay? So don't need to become confused whenever you look at 2D pictures. They always look like everything is smack in the same place. But in real life, they are different. You are not going to be tested on anatomical mapping. So I don't need you to reproduce three-dimensional locations of where things are. All right? We just want to get through some of the basic things and then look at what are some of the things to debunk out there. And then later on, we look at how does this apply to your daily living. All right? So let's go back to here. This corpus callosum is one of 4 connecting bridges. I use simpler terms. Connecting bridges where the left and the right brain use to communicate between each other. Corpus callosum is the biggest of the communication bridge. There are 3 more, they are tiny ones. They are not within your syllabus, so let's forget about them. This corpus callosum, which has about 200 million nerve fibers, will allow lots and lots of talking to go through in your left and right brain. Then what do they do? Now, if your left brain, right, contains your Broca's and Wernicke's area, what does your right brain contain? Ever thought of that? Because just now I said there's if you're a right-hander, 90% chance your language centers are located on your left brain. Then what do you do with your right brain? And what about those left-handers? Actually, somehow, right, evolution has favored the left hemisphere to house language centers. So even if you look at left-handers, so they are right brain dominant, 70% of them will still have the language centers, right, located in the left brain. So whether you have 90 or 70%, they are all left. The Broca's and Wernicke's are housed in the left brain. As for why it's like that, we have no idea yet. Like what happened during evolution that pushed the language centers to one particular side. Okay? But the question still remains, then what about the other side? Will the other side deal with language? Or they deal with something out there that has nothing to do with language but still help us in understanding? So to understand this, let's watch a video about something that looks like this. Oh, shucks. Wait, gotta project again. What happens when a person has a split brain? That means surgically they cut the corpus callosum. So the person now has what we call a split brain syndrome. How do they work? How do they function in real life? Now, as I switch, right, I will explain why is there such a thing called split brain surgery. How can you just cut the brain like that? The reason is because it's to save the person's life. Yeah, sometimes people have very bad epileptic seizures. So if they don't respond to the brain activity suppressing drugs, then the only way out to stop the brain from short-circuiting and killing itself is actually to cut the corpus callosum. When you cut it, it will, when you cut it, right, it will stop one side of the signal from going to the other side and wreaking havoc. So worst case scenario, you are able to suppress all the false signals, right, and keep it to only one side. So it's only damaging one side. But what we found since the 50s is this, that whenever we do a split brain for people with very severe epileptic seizures, somehow, right, the seizures will go down too. So originally the hypothesis was to contain the seizure activity in one side of the brain, so it wouldn't go both sides. But we realized that once it's cut, right, the seizures drop until about only 20-30%. So somehow, if you let the brains communicate, it actually worsens the seizures. If you stop it, the seizures will go down. But this comes with a big cost. So we will usually just administer medication first until like there's no way out. A person suffers dozens of seizures every day, and then the drugs cannot do anything. Okay, then maybe we'll consider this. So
what exactly is
no,
like what happens to the brain?
okay. Many parts of the brain, if not all the brain, they will fire up. So by right, you're supposed to have regulated neuron firing, but now all of them are firing at the same time with very huge intensity. So much that it causes the person to just tense up because there is nothing they can do, okay? There's no regulated activity at all. You have to wait until the seizure passes. The brain is not stupid. It's not trying to kill itself. What it will do is it will fire up, it will use up the resources, then it has to take a break. So after maybe worst case scenario, 10-15 minutes, it will stop. But the problem is some people, right, they seizure for a few minutes, stop for a few minutes, seizure again for a few minutes, and endlessly. So these are the people who may need to have a split brain procedure done on them. Okay, let's watch the video. And where did my mouse go? Okay. I think we may have to turn up the volume. How come there is no sound? Oh, we have to share screen and share the what is it?
But there's no sound in
Got it. Something wrong with the video.
Yeah. Do you have another video?
No.
The same one.
This was the old disc I used last time.
Oh.
But it was working fine last year.
Okay.
Okay, I will explain. So I will give the commentary. Yeah, at sections of this. So what happened is you see this guy who, this guy, all right, he is the patient with the split brain. And they are gonna do an experiment to show you how it's like. So one is the experimenter, the other is the interviewing psychologist, all right? Now let's fast forward to, so here they explain the corpus callosum, which I already did. So now this guy, he works as like those Amazon inventory worker. So in the storehouse, right, nowadays they use robots. But in the past, they have workers in the storehouse, they will shelve and inventorize everything, right? So this is what this guy called Joe works as. Now, here's the setup. Take a look at this. So in this setup, you will have the person draw something that they either heard or seen. But when they are doing it, they have to use 2 hands to try and draw it. Okay? And they cannot see the thing. So if you look at my mouse, this board, right, doesn't just stop here. It extends all the way, so the person's head is somewhere behind this wooden thing, so he cannot see what he's drawing. A simple way for you to experience this is to, maybe if I say draw a water bottle. I mean, you don't have to be a perfect artist. You close your eyes and you try to sketch out a water bottle. Not in your mind, but on a piece of paper. Okay, you can do this later. You'll find that even though you don't get it proportionally correct, but roughly the picture is there. Okay, so water bottle, I mean like the one that Alan has. So no, this is something we always see. Shouldn't be a problem to roughly get the picture out, correct? So we can all sketch.
I think they got the video on YouTube.
Okay.
If you want to,
We can try and switch to YouTube and see whether it's playable with sound. No. If it's no sound, then it's the system got problem. It's not playing any sound.
Yeah, it's a system problem really.
Then never mind, I continue the commentary then.
Okay, can I try?
Okay, those of you online, if you want to watch with sound, you can just mute what I'm saying and just continue to watch the video from start to the end. I will continue with commentary, so those people in class will be able to follow through.
Can I try something?
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
know if it will work or it.
Who? This guy? I know. I can't remember his name, but he's not an actor. He will introduce himself as a psychologist. Unless the actor is also a psychologist. Not like, what's that? Natalie Portman, I think. Natalie Portman has a, I think she went on to take a PhD in psychology, plus she's also, of course, an actress. Cannot? Okay.
I cannot hear anything.
All right, it's a system thing, so I will continue to comment and show you what they are referring to. People online, if you want to watch, you can go ahead and finish the video first. What is this blue thing? Kai?
Sorry? Okay, wait now.
Oh, it's the YouTube thing.
Yeah.
All right, now, so there you notice the contraption. He can't see. So what he did was he decided to try before Joe, all right, the interviewing psychologist, and he drew. So if you look at what he drew, it's not really that great. See? You are not sure what he's seen yet, but inside the video, all right, the word telephone was projected. But it was very fast. So how it works is like this. You might be able to see the demo later on. What it did was, in this computer screen, there is a cross in the middle where you're supposed to focus. So you don't dart your eyeball anywhere. And then very fast, right, the word will present for half a second. Come on, come off. But what happened is, it looks like this. If the cross is somewhere in the middle, let's say this is the screen, the word will be projected either at here, or it's projected to the right side for half a second. So for half a second, it's not long enough a time for you to refocus, but it's sufficient time for the word to pop into your brain. So if your eyeball is actually fixed in the middle as the word comes out, what will happen is the light pathway, right, will project to the retina in an angled way. Therefore, it will hit either the left or right side of your brain, because the way the eyeball works is that the nerves, right, if you hit it on one side of the nerve, then the nerve will carry and it will go to that particular, the opposite side of the brain. That's how it's wired. They want the projected thing to hit on only one side of the brain. One way out is to hit it on half a side of the retina. So that's the thing. Now, if you look at him, he was trying to draw. He was drawing a telephone. But which one looks like, this is an old telephone he was drawing, not our usual cell phone. But you look at the picture. Okay. So we can now fast forward because I've commented this part. I'd like you to take a look before we leave this part. The picture he did, which one looked more like a telephone? On this side, right? This one. At least he tried to draw the telephone, the handpiece.
Sorry, I'm just sharing the correct screen now.
Oh, you're sharing to them too?
Yeah, correct. Now
okay.
Okay. Yeah, okay, you can continue. I see.
Okay, so he tried, but it just got worse. Now, here, before we continue, I'd like you to make a guess. For someone with intact brain, as he sees the word telephone, he could only master a part of the telephone picture. And in this case, using his left hand. Assume he's a right-hander. What about a split brain person? Will the person perform better or worse off in the drawing? Okay? So, if we don't want to see, I knew it. You can write it somewhere first. What is your answer? Do you think it will be better or worse? The question is, for a split brain person, will the person be able to draw the telephone better or worse when compared to a normal person? So let's just put it this way. If we see the drawing later and the drawing can complete more than just half a earpiece thing, the handset thing, then it's better than this guy. Because that's the best he could master. The other side also don't know what he's drawing. Okay? Maybe because he wasn't used to using the other hand. All right, that's why he couldn't get it. Now let's fast forward to where the gentleman was tested. So here they explain what I just did, the cross, all right? Okay, now.
Words flashed to the right
Storm
are seen only by his left brain, and Joe can report seeing those words just fine.
Piano. Good.
But when a word is flashed
So
to his
here,
right
you notice
brain,
he's not drawing. It's simply because they are testing whether he could actually, the word flash, right? Was it fast enough for him to capture? Then he's put to the drawing test. Obviously, he is not expected to draw storm. How to draw?
Didn't see that.
Okay. John, I'm going to ask you
but now watch what happens.
to draw that with your left hand.
Oh, before I continue, where was the word presented, on the left or the right side of the screen? Left side, right? As in the word phone, you rewind a bit, it was on the left side of the screen, which means it will hit the right brain. Okay, now let's see his drawing. The right brain controls which hand? Left hand. Take a look. He was using his left hand to draw, right?
You're gonna be lost.
Why don't you try drawing another picture of it over here if that will help you.
Oh, phone.
Oh, okay.
it's almost as though somebody has.
Do you think he outperformed the normal person? Yeah. So now, without distraction from the gibberish on the so-called language side, because the right brain is doing the job, it's able to say what it has seen by showing the picture. Okay?
Has given him
But
a secret communication.
he couldn't-
That's right. Now he knows that.
He said, I don't know what I saw. Meaning, when you ask him, the language center, can you report what you saw? Instead, he said, I don't know. Why? Ask yourself the question. Did the language center, which is the left brain, which means the right visual field, did that right visual field actually see anything? The word was presented on which side? So, just now, the phone was presented here. So this will eventually reach the right side of the brain. right? Left to right, yeah. But the language center is located at where? Language centers will be from here. This will project to the language part of the brain. But was there anything given to the language brain? No. That's why when he reported, right, he said, I can't report anything. But when you ask him to draw, then he drew very well. But if you look at just now the interviewing psychologist, he saw with both eyes. And both sides were intact. Even if he saw with one eye, both sides communicated. The moment there was communicated a phone, how did he perform? There was jamming already, right? So would you like to live with one brain or two brains? Let's finish up this thing.
That it's a telephone. Up until then, he was blind to it.
Exactly.
When Gazzaniga first did this experiment, it instantly proved that the ability to speak resides almost exclusively in the left hemisphere. Not until he sees what his right brain is drawing is Joe able to name it.
He said church, didn't he? After looking at the picture.
But he had to figure it out about as long as we did. That's really interesting.
Okay, you can go home and watch this fully. Now, without any interference, it wasn't a problem to reproduce the thing. They outperformed the person who had both brains intact, or both sides intact. But do we really want a higher performance in this way? Now, don't answer because you feel that, no lah, cannot be, because if you go and damage the brain, obviously it's bad. This is reasoning not based on rationale. This is just based on the feeling that when we try to spoil the body, it's always bad. Now that may or may not be accurate, okay? On the other hand, if you feel that you want to reason it because there are certain functions fulfilled or there are some problems, then it would be a more objective decision. So if you throw it out to the public, right, most people will say, yeah, you want to damage the brain for better performance, you crazy, right? Because it is not crazy, it is really not advisable. When people have split brain, that means their brain cannot process all the information at the same time, right? What happens when it's an emergency? When you catch glimpse of things here and there? You are not going to survive, or at least you have lesser chances of survival compared to a person with intact brain, correct? So whilst emergency won't occur to everyone all the time, but we are ready for emergencies. A person such as them, they can work normally, like as an inventory clerk or store clerk, but not able to do anything that requires quick reaction. So there are pros and cons. When the brain evolves a corpus callosum, and we suddenly are able to react much faster, we also sacrifice a bit of performance because we are now capable of becoming what? Interfered. After all, when one brain did not see something, it will contribute that information, and if that information is nothing, it will jam the something. All right? So ultimately, your frontal lobe must come in and then decide which one is really seeing something. What am I supposed to do now? I'm supposed to draw something. So obviously, reasoning this out, we must have seen something. Let's rely on the right brain's information. And that's how the person, but before that, right, if under stress, and the person will in what we Singaporeans say, will garang kabut. All right, in other words, he will clumsily not be able to draw properly. All right. Now, in real life, some people say, but this is only surgically possible. In real life, will it happen? People who have stroke can end up with their corpus callosum damaged. Then, what will happen is, all right, they may have I think later on there's a slide called alien hand syndrome. So I give you an example of what it's like when the corpus callosum, right, gets damaged. I took it out already. Oh yeah. I think it's something that I don't need you to put stars there, that's why I took it out. But since I started it, I finished quickly about it. Alien hand syndrome, when the left and the right brain cannot talk to each other, what you see is that they usually neglect one side. So I'll tell you two things. One is what we call hemispheric neglect. So this means that the person will neglect half of their visual field. So over here, you have someone who has improved with rehab. Eventually, he just slowed down and he could draw out something, then see carefully, and so that the other side of the brain also got the information. But a patient who is just fresh, if you let's say I have one patient, right? You let the patient eat a bowl of rice. So a bowl of rice is a round bowl. The patient will eat it and then exactly only half the bowl. So you ask the patient will slur a bit because of the stroke. So you say, okay, you finish eating, the patient said yes. You rotate 180 degrees. So now he could see, so the bowl is like this. After he finished eating, it looked like this. The bowl. So the shaded side was the remaining rice in the bowl. So he finish. Then, and he looked at it from this angle. So then you rotate this, and then he realized, oh, haven't finished. Then he'll continue to eat. Okay? Not able to process information. Then another one with alien hand syndrome. Then you ask her to, suppose, right, I demonstrate as the patient as well. You ask the patient to raise hand. Raise your right hand. So this is my right hand, okay? So raise your right hand like that. So this side got stroke. And raise your left hand. Raise your right hand. Always like this. So after a few times, right, you point to this. You make sure they follow your gaze. You point to this. Then whose hand is this? The patient answered, your hand. They totally don't care about that side anymore. Now, in that case, right, when you neglect half your visual field, your environment, you neglect half your body, what are the chances of survival? So the brain, being able to communicate, being intact, is essential for us to behave in a normal way and to optimize our survival. All right? Oh, okay. Question? So you kind of see this kind of things, of course, initially when you first work in such settings, you say, wow, so interesting. After some time, then you say, okay, need more work done, okay? So these are the things. And there is no way, so back to debunking the myths, right? There is no way you can train yourself just focusing on one side. Of course, you can purposely project information to one side of the brain, or if you are trying to do language and you are very sure that you are like the majority, your language center is in your left brain, so you deliberately, do something to your left brain, you might actually sacrifice other functions, maybe even making it detrimental to your survival in the long term when you deal with complex things. So all the internet stuff about what focusing on one side of the brain, that's rubbish. You always need both sides of the brain in order to optimize your function. All right? Those people who can't, after like that, just now that guy, right, he got both sides intact, he goes in. But if you give him, let's say 2 weeks to practice, he would do just fine. In other words, reach both sides of the brain with sufficient practice, you will have no problem. In fact, you will perform much better and still be capable of emergency reactions. Okay? So those early education, right brain training program. Then later people throw chat at me when I answer this question, how? The question is, so those early education, right brain training programs, they don't work? If you are dealing with a child with brain problem, so we already demonstrated one side of the brain is functioning much lower. You need to kickstart that side. Then you focus on one side, you force stimulation onto that side. Then yes. If you are dealing with someone who is normal, it's never advisable to just stimulate only on one side. Okay? Short term, you're going to get improvements, yes. But long term, you do not know what you're going to compromise. All right? Now, the rest are things I don't need you to put stars on. So we started off last week saying that the spinal cord is actually doing the thinking too, not just your brain. But the spinal cord does a lot of very quick thinking, like usually it's to save your life, very reflexive. If you touch the stove, you pull your hand fast away enough, pull your hand quickly away, that will be processing by the spinal cord. So here the slide only tells you the structure of the spinal cord, no big deal. Basically, right, the brain and the spinal cord, they look very similar in terms of coloring. If you actually, once you remove okay, this whole thing is called a skull. Cranium really refers to the bone structure that like on top housing your brain. So once you remove the cranium, you are gonna see whitish, creamy looking, I mean, don't ignore the blood, but, okay, that sounds bad. All right, but you're gonna look at something creamy, okay, creamy in color. That's because that's not the brain cells. That's actually all the brain cells with a protective layer of fatty tissue. Now, by itself, the brain cell is actually invisible. Okay, we need to add artificial dye in order to make it visible under microscope. So what happens is when you look at the brain cells are all invisible, but when you have millions and millions of them together, they reflect, they will, because of opacity, right, they start to reflect light, so they appear grayish. So all your brain cells, clumps and clumps of them, they are grayish in color. If you only take a tiny bit, it's actually invisible. The whitish thing you see is actually the protective fatty tissue. It's called myelin sheath. Later we will look at that. Okay? Then next one will be, what's the function? I think I mentioned all this. So generally, it's meant to relay sensation to your brain, and of course to then relay the signal from your brain down if you are doing some kind of thinking, planned action. If it's reflexive action, then the sensation will still reach your brain, but you probably will have a motor reflexive movement to pull your hand away, for example, before your brain actually can plan anything else. All right? Last bit is that this part also I don't need you to memorize. There are 12, we will see this picture later on. Some people ask the question, is the brain and the spinal cord, right, they are the central nervous system, but I noticed there are some pictures like somehow the brain has extension to reach other parts of the body. But these extensions are called cranial nerves. So if you actually look at pictures, you don't become confused. Sometimes they draw the brain, the spinal cord, and then they have some yellow color thing that, these are the cranial nerves that extends directly from the brain, but they are also part of peripheral nervous system. They don't think. Their job is to relay signal, that's it. All right? And then, of course, the nerves, there are two main functions. One is to receive signal and send it to the brain and spinal cord. And then that's the afferent pathways, sometimes known as afferent nerves. And all the nerves that transmit signal from the brain and spinal cord to the parts of your body to trigger actions, that's called the efferent pathways. All right? So AFF is like affect, so you affected from the environment, it retrieves the signal. EFF is to effect something. All right? So these are ancient Latin words that somehow got incorporated into English to tell you the direction of the nervous pathways signaling. And here is the last slide talking about what happens when people, this is really just to clarify, all right, your understanding in case you read. I don't expect you to memorize so much and for test. So people with nervous system damage can end up either with all their limbs no more functioning, or with only half of their body able to still function. So quadriplegics are people who have, quadriplegia are people who have all four limbs down. So usually this is a spinal cord or brain injury. Where if it's a spinal cord injury, it's usually very high up, nearer to the neck. So the signals no longer transmit down from neck down. So they can't move all their four limbs. For half sight, right, there is something called hemiplegia and paraplegia. So a paraplegic person, this kind of paralysis usually depicts people with spinal cord problem, but they can't move waist down. So they can flail their arms, They just can't move their legs. They are wheelchair bound. So this is like typical paralysis that you watch on TV. You know, those people with spinal cord problem, they're on wheelchair. Hemiplegia, H-E-M-I, plagia. These are people with half side of their body with problem. And that's like stroke people. So after they got a stroke, because the stroke sometimes can be contained in only one side of the brain. So in this case, right, maybe let's say the left brain got hit, so the right brain is still intact, therefore, right brain connects to left side of the body. So you find that their left side of the body can still be doing things, but their right side of the body, it's down. So in case you read ahead, you have all these kind of things, all these technical terms, now you don't have to search the dictionary for it. This last part is just, this one we will talk about later. This last part is just a summary of how it would actually be like. Now it's pretty small here. I think, yeah. From your notes, it appears better. So you just refer to your notes. Question? Rebecca's question is, can we follow into the operating theater to observe the brain? You can try it on Dr. X. It's a Japanese drama. Okay? Otherwise, nobody is supposed to go in because you're going to add to the infection problem. And for those observational things, it's usually meant for staff. It's not meant for public. Okay? Because we only use it for learning. We don't use it for caregivers. You just have to wait. Okay?
Sorry, that means quick question, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a few things you highlighted for us to pay attention to. But for the midbrain, it doesn't seem to have anything up there that you want to.
Midbrain, like I mentioned last week, is mainly to do with all the reflexive actions. So it's not just simply pulling your hand away, but you may want to remember last week at the end to poke your eye up, I suddenly shouted, and then everybody turned. Now, you notice that we don't, whenever we pay attention, even to softer sounds, we don't raise our head in awareness, then we think about it to turn to that direction. It's usually a very fluid, smooth movement where if you are doing this and you're going to come up, right, whatever is the commotion, you're already turning. So the thing is, when you receive information, the reason why your ears are apart is so that the brain can then calculate, right, the difference in the timing between the two sounds. So this will allow the brain to pinpoint the rough location of where the sound is coming from. So people who have one side down, they are usually slower in reaction because they have to get used to the new way, and the brain cannot accurately pinpoint the sound. All right? Not that they can't. The brain will overcome this and start to learn new ways, but it takes time, and it will not be super accurate after that. All right? Now, so don't worry so much about it. The midbrain, just remember, is all the reflexive thing. Now let's go on to the next part. Click back here. Still cannot. My nervous system down already. Okay, the last bit you saw just now was actually something like this, like efferent pathways. We already learned about that. So this is just a picture to show you how it could be like if the little girl plays with fire, the signal will run along the sensory nerves. So that's efferent. And to pull away, the efferent nerves will transmit the motor signal down. Okay, so this one easy. Then, what makes you capable of behavior? It's always an interaction between external stimulus and your internal environment. Of course, we are more complex. We may sometimes want to plan ahead. So like maybe we are not hungry now, but we know we'll be hungry later. We need supper. So we plan ahead, all right? All these are actually from your learning and from the signals in your body. Okay, so again, nothing much to mention. This one you already know. This is just a technical presentation of what I mentioned in layman's term. The only thing to focus on is actually maybe say this and this.
They cannot see you.
Oh yeah, no worries. I moved the mouse over.
Okay, which one is it? Action potential.
So action potential, electrical transmission, is really what's making your nervous system work. Or yeah, relying on electrical signals is really what's helping your nervous system to function. All right. Yes and no. Yes, because we are electrical in nature. So any form of electrical energy we have some affinity to. If it can run through our body, then yes. So the basic answer to your question is actually a yes, because we are electrical in nature. But if that's the case, then we should be always feeling it, but it's not all the time because we are already very weak. You know, so if let's say it's very humid and the electrical energy in the environment is already being absorbed by all the can't be seen water molecules, we are safe. All right.
How about the police officer using the stun gun?
The stun gun is actually 2 wires. So when they shoot it, right? No, the stun gun is 2 wires. So the 2 wires will hit you. One is positive, negative, so it completes the loop. Then because you can transmit electricity, so the battery will discharge, and then the electricity will run in through one electrode, go out from the other electrode, completes the cycle. You feel the shock, the gun feels the shock, but the gun is the gun. So you can still think, but your muscles you can't control. What happens is the shock will actually mess up your motor movement. So you will scream, you are aware of the pain, you will just collapse there, you can't move, and you will continue not to be able to regulate your movement for a few minutes after that. Sometimes immediately after that you can struggle a bit, but after that, right, you find that somewhere around 1 to 3 minutes later, you should be able to struggle, move about, but you can't really move like normal, so they will still nab you. Okay. Not just there, but all the muscles, your muscles require signals, and they also have chemicals to make use of all this signaling. But the big discharge actually messes up all the neurotransmitters, which we will cover shortly. So even if your brain says yes, but all the chemicals stored in your muscles are not saying yes, so they still can't move properly. Yes. All right. There are some people who can train themselves to actually resist this, but those are super powerful martial artists. But it takes plenty of time for us to learn this, so better don't go against the law. So there are a lot of things we have not tapped into, the power of the brain. But it's true, the brain can actually regulate a lot of things. So some of these things, that's why you find that science hasn't caught up with these people to really study them. Secondly, a lot of these martial artists are in countries where they are considered as the national treasures. So the usual American science, UK science, where all these are based from or has more, they don't reach those countries. And those countries don't usually have the high tech to look into all this. And if they do, like in China, it's all militarized, so we really don't know much. Okay, but I have seen before, not just one person, but many people, they are able to control the flow of, they literally put they connect to there and they purposely use a transformer to power up. So we are looking at the person being electrocuted at, the current maybe have gone down, but the voltage is almost to 500 volts already. But the person is just, he is not talking because I think it's difficult, but he was able to still move around. So there's so if you shock the person with the stun gun, maybe nothing will happen. Or he will recover in a fraction of a second much faster than other people. But the best thing was he would actually then hold a light bulb. And then he said, make it brighter, he will make it brighter. So he allows more voltage to travel across, or he controls the voltage to travel underground. So the bulb just dim. So we know that the brain can do a lot more things. It's just that, politically, we are unable to further find out things. Okay, so this is just to pique your interest. All right, good. At least now you know what you read. those things that are published, sometimes it's not that they are untrue. It's just that there is too little advancement in exploration into all these things. Of course, we are still not at the stage where we just want to think and then we can fly. I think that's still not there yet. All right, so back to here. All these are possible because your nervous system allows things to happen. And mainly, we are focusing on three things: sensation, action, so sensation, action, and the processing part. Interneurons are nerve cells that connect to other nerve cells. Their main job is to weigh out all the signals and then come to a decision. That would be your information processing. I wouldn't call it thinking, so don't write the wrong word. Thinking is a very big term already. Information processing is different. All right, so the cells are not brains. They may not think like your brain, but they do process the information, deciding whether to pass on the information or not. At least this is something they definitely will do. All right? Now, in your body, you have different looking types of nerve cells. And here are some of them. Most of the sensory nerves look like this. Okay? Look like the one on the top left. Top right. Sometimes they can also look like this, depending on the connection. So if the connection is a straightforward sending of signal, it usually looks like the top right. But if the connection requires some amplification of signal, but still mainly transmitting signal, then it may look like the bottom left. For those that are dealing with information processing, most of them look like the bottom right. As for this axonic neuron, something that is shown on the top left, we notice them around. We are actually not sure why they are around. Okay? Because why? Take a look at this. There is an extended tentacle here, correct? So whatever this cell body picks up from all these little things, it would then process the information, all right, in this bulge here of the body. Then it will, after processing, it will send the signal down to the next cell. But if you look at the axonic neuron, they seems to be not sending anything. So it's either they are not sending anything or they are sending everything. But if they are sending everything, right, how do they actually decide when to receive, when to send? Because they seem to be using the same channel for one thing. And I already mentioned these are not brains. They don't think. They only process information. So they are like your computer chip. It processes information. It allows signal to pass either one way or both ways depending on the clock. Okay? So we don't really understand them. We notice them around, and for the past 30 years, 40 years, nobody has managed to crack the code. Like why are they there and how do they actually carry out the function? We just believe strongly that this deals with information processing. Okay? So let's look at the more common type, the thinking thing. You already learned that this part here, or this thing, these branches, they are to receive signals from the previous cell, correct? So the name for this is dendrite. Each of these is a dendrite, so they have many dendritic branches. Each dendrite will receive some signal from some cells. How many cells? So usually, right, if you look at your brain and your spinal cord, this interneuron, about one neuron, this neuron will connect to about easily 15 to 50,000 nerves. So average around 30,000. So one cell is connected to another 30,000 nerves. So that's why they have lots and lots of all these branches. It is to what? It is to receive signals from all the various other nerve cells. So they come in, they will let all the signals through, then all the signals will aggregate, and then this thing will decide, strong enough or not strong enough. If strong enough, I will send a signal onwards. So if it does feel that I need to send, So somewhere around here, right, it would trigger a structural process where there's a chemical reaction, and then it will generate electricity. The electricity will flow down. This is like a wire, and eventually you will reach the end where certain chemicals are being released to the next cell. So here, you ask the question, where do our behaviors start? It's all within one nerve cell. And it's always in an electrical nature. Okay, enough theory. Now, oh, by the way, put a star here. Yeah. Don't worry, I will give you videos to help you memorize this. This kind of thing need videos. You cannot do it like 20 years ago. We had no videos.
So it's like a broken telephone like that, is it? Like
Broken telephone?
Like it's like a telephone cord, like you get one, and it goes to the next cell, and then the next cell is the same, and then it gets...
Yeah, so every cell is like this. They just send the signal on and on and on. But do you notice that there are gaps here? So this is not like a normal wire. Normal wire has full rubber insulation. This myelin sheath is it's made up by fatty acid. So this fatty tissue, it leaves a gap in between. Why? Because you see, in your system, your electricity is not free electrons. It's not like a copper wire where the electrons flow. Over here, we have other chemicals. We have what you eat. Most of us eat some kind of salt, correct? When you learned last time in secondary school, salt is actually sodium, what? Sodium chloride. So once it dissolves, it will become sodium ions and chlorine ions. So they float in your system. Sodium is made use of by the cells to produce the electricity. Okay? The other thing is potassium. So a lot of our foods actually contain sodium, potassium, calcium. All these three are needed for all this signaling. You have too little of any of them, then you are just heading for disaster. Okay? Of course, I'm not saying that then you just go and gouge salt and then after that you end up with a heart attack. Okay? Or kidney failure. There is a certain limit that we need. All right? This is beyond the syllabus. You can just Google for that information. Okay, now all these I will leave you to read. And I already talked about parts of the neuron. It's easier for me to use the picture and point to it rather than use the words. But in your revision, you need the words. They are all listed there, plus with the description. Okay? All human infants are born with about 150 billion neurons in our spinal cord and in our brain together. But the moment you're born, right, the first few seconds already a few million will die. Some are because of squeezing through the passage of delivery. By the time you reach adolescence, you will only be left with about 100 billion neurons. That's why it's here. I mentioned this so that you don't get confused, because some books will tell you 150. That's because that is the amount we are born with. Okay? They have to die, and it's killed off by your other brain cells. The reason is to make space for the brain to grow. So a lot of people thought there are more brain cells better. It's not. Actually, if you have too much brain cells, you end up becoming what? An idiot. Yeah. So people with mental retardation, right, if it can be, it's not only the wiring problem, it can be because they don't kill off sufficient brain cells, so then the actual brain cells to grow cannot grow. Okay? So they need to kill off some of the brain cells to create spaces for this thing to happen. Can you see that this axon, there are extensions? So all these extensions, right, more and more will form, and then so there is always one main axon. But at the end of the axon, right, it will branch off to connect with other brain cells. If you don't have space for all these to grow and make new connections, it's stuck. So your learning cannot be coded into something. All right. So the more connections you have, other than useless connections, so the more connections you have, the likelier that you are able to think faster and also think in a more effective way. All right. Of course, you have too little brain cells also cannot. I mean, you have only 50 brain cells, then you are also going to become an idiot too, right? Because there's not enough brain cells to do the work. So we need a balance number. The balance number is around about somewhere around 90 to 110 billion with about average of 20 to 30,000 connections per neuron. Okay. Now, so let's go down. A lot of these things are just for your information. They are there so that it completes the picture. Now, we're going to look at electrical impulses. And I think I should show you two things. I want to show you videos of how they work. All right, this side is actually to remind myself to, I'm going to make a check. How many of you cannot remember what is the difference between atom, molecule, and ions? It's from secondary school. Yeah, but that was like a long time ago. Okay, atoms, can remember? The basic of things, right? Atoms. So atoms always has one center and then some electrons circulating it, right? Now, it is unstable. In order to become stable in real life, so other than all the gas giant, the neon, the whatever, all the stable gas giants, right, at the end. So we have what? The rest of the atoms are all unstable. In order to stabilize themselves, they don't anyhow react. They have to combine with other things. So in the case of your table salt, sodium chloride, sodium is unstable. It will go into a reaction, it will discharge energy. So one thing is chlorine is available and their electrons are just happily matching, so they get married. Right? They combine together. So one big group now is called molecule. So now can remember, right? Atom, molecule. But in your body, you have a lot of fluids. So all these things will dissolve. When they dissolve, right, they go back into their unstable state. So the sodium will float with a bit of electrical charge on it. The electrical charge is actually indicative of its instability, so it's trying to react to something. And this process is leveraged on by all living organisms. So we eventually evolve, right, some mechanisms to make use of this instability. So you find that a lot of organisms out there need to eat some kind of salt. So the sodium is used to do all this processing to let the nervous system work. Okay? All right, so atom, we all know what is that. To have stable atom, they sometimes have combos, that's called molecules. But molecules, when it's dissolved, it becomes unstable, it splits apart again. This unstable thing is called ions. Okay? So then there's positive and negative ions, which is the cation and anion respectively. Now, let's watch a video. Otherwise, it's very difficult to imagine. Yes, thank you. I didn't even press. I was like trying to do, yeah, trying to find my mouse. Okay, this will explain a lot of things.
The pain you experience when you burn your hand results so quickly in an action by your muscles.
Okay, now, this video, right, although I'm showing you here, it will clarify some things, but you will find that after one time watching it, right, in about 2 minutes, all the information is lost. It's nothing wrong with the video, it's just that these are all very new information. So please go home and rewatch it so it becomes clearer. All right? The video will condense a lot of things in a very easy to understand way, but it's very fast. That's why I say very soon you'll forget. But that also means that what? You will be able to understand it. It's just that you cannot integrate the information just yet. All right? But it's coming soon. Okay, let's continue.
Many animals respond to environmental stimuli using specialized cells called neurons. A stimulus is detected by sensory receptors, and the body responds through motor effectors. These cells working together allow you to respond very quickly to threats. When you touch something hot, heat receptors of a sensory neuron detect the stimuli and send the information of heat to an interneuron in your central nervous system. From there, a motor neuron sends a response from your central nervous system to the skeletal muscles in your arm, causing them to contract and pull your hand away.
The fundamental process of neural transmission that underlies this action occurs in all neurons of the body. Neurons transmit this information through changes in the electrical potential of the membrane.
Okay, now, this picture shows you a few things. Now, if you look at the yellow color stuff, right? Or yellow or orange color, depending on how you interpret this. This is actually the so-called the skin or the wall of the neuron. Of course, they cross-section slice it so that you can see all the structures clearly. Okay? Now, this round thing and the strip is actually one phosphate molecule. And two of these molecules form the so-called the skin. We don't call it cell wall because cell wall is a technical term. It means something more robust, much harder. It happens in plants. Animals, humans, different. All right, we call it membrane. So housed within these membranes are certain protein structures. Protein is a big word. We are now talking about very microscopic protein structures. So it's not unlike those things that you just eat. Okay? Now, so this thing, this purple, blue, and green stuff is the thing that allows sodium, potassium to transmit across. Every time there is an exchange, because of the movement, the electrons will then generate an electrical charge. So keep in mind, I said this is not wire. It's not like you have a battery, electrons flow, and then you have electricity. For humans, for animals, for insects, we need what? We need potassium and sodium to move in and out of the cell. All right, but because these atoms, right, or these ions, they have free floating electrons, or almost free, being attached to them. So as they bring the electrons to and fro, they create electrical charges. So that's why you are able to generate electrical impulses. And then the body, right, have all these cells to then regulate the discharge of all this electricity. So now becoming signal. Got it? So your behavior really goes down to at this microscopic level. Until today, it's still pretty dry. Next week, we will look at how you think you can make decisions, but actually you can't, because a lot of things in life is actually affecting the way you make decisions. And they all make use of all these processes. To the extent where there are poor things like certain ants, they get affected by moles, all right? So those mole spores, and they become zombified. So for example, some ants, they have their system taken over. Once they are infected by a certain mole, the only thing the ant could do is during daytime, it will crawl up to the top of maybe the grass and just do sun tanning. And then at night, it will be free, it comes back. So it de-zombifies. Why? The reason is because the mole actually found a way to propagate itself. Once it infects the ant, it spores the ant up, ant goes up to the top of the leaf, the ant stays there doing nothing, it is just waiting to be eaten. So maybe by hippopotamus or rhinoceros, which once they eat it, so the spores now get transmitted into the animal, right? I can't remember whether it's rhino or hippo. Then the spores will have a chance to mix with the internal juices and the feces, and therefore they can make more of themselves. The ant is just a vehicle. So the ant got taken over. It can't think one. Daytime is just waiting to die. All right? At nighttime, no light, right? The spores are smart, so it releases its grip. It just waits for the next day. For humans, we are very complex, such we don't get zombified. At least we haven't found anything like that yet. Maybe it's happening. But, okay, there are certain things, even the food you eat actually overrides some of your decision-making capacity. Okay? Now let's finish this.
Movement of ions across the membrane.
We will stop at 10:10.
An electrochemical gradient governs the movement of these ions, resulting in an electrical impulse. The resting membrane potential in a neuron, when the cell is not firing an impulse, is established by the unequal distribution of sodium ions outside of the cell and potassium ions inside the cell, making the outside of the cell more positively charged compared to the inside. The electrochemical gradient is established and made.
Okay, this ATP thing is actually the energy you use. So all the foods that you eat, whether it's carbohydrates, proteins, whatever, eventually it will be broken down into something called adenosine triphosphate. This is the real energy currency. All animals, bacteria even, okay? they use ATP. But so not everything will use your carbohydrates or whatever, but it will eventually becomes this. Why is this here? So that it can, this purple color and green color, right, which allows potassium and sodium to go through, they are free of charge. They move because of the electricity that is coming, the signal. But something must be used to restore the balance again after using. So that's why you notice the 3 sodium ions move out, and then it will pull in some potassium once discharged. So this thing is not free. It needs energy to power up. The energy comes from your food, which is digested, blah, 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 eventually made into ATP and stored within all your cells, your nerve cells included. So then when it needs to restore, it will expand the ATP to power up this thing to maintain the balance of something called negative 70 millivolt. You see this as you watch the video.
Maintained by an enzyme called sodium-potassium ATPase. When a neuron is stimulated, sodium ion channels open and sodium ions flow into the cell. This leads to a change in the electrical potential across the membrane called depolarization. The depolarizing electrical potential travels down the dendrites and over the cell body. Multiple electrical potentials will combine at the axon hillock in a process called summation. If the depolarization is large enough, an action potential is triggered. Action potentials are all or none electrical impulses that maintain their amplitude and strength down the length of the axon. The action potential travels down the axon when the depolarization of an area of membrane causes adjacent
when you go home to watch,
sodium ion.
You can have a chance to re-watch a few times. Watch this, focus on this too. It will talk about the changes in the strength of the electricity moving parts. All right, you find that this thing is actually the way the signal works. All right.
Ion channels to open. The influx of sodium ions results in membrane depolarization along the membrane. After a short delay, potassium ion channels open and potassium ions flow out, repolarizing the membrane. For the neuron to fire again, the resting membrane potential needs to be re-established. Sodium-potassium ATPase is used to move sodium and potassium ions against their concentration gradients, re-establishing the resting membrane potential. As the action potential moves down the axon, ions are diffusing only a short distance, allowing the signal to move quickly. At the axon terminal, the electrical impulse passes to another cell at a cellular connection called a synapse.
Okay, now, remember just now the axon at the end, there was a lot of branches and a bulb. So this is actually a blow up or zoom in visual of what you see there. Now, there is always a gap between the terminal axon and the dendritic surface of the next cell, except in infants, for humans. Okay? Infants are born without the gap, so all these will directly connect. Now that's why infants don't have much behavior, cry or don't cry. Okay? Because whenever there's a signal, the signal will immediately pass to the next cell. Doesn't cater for variation. But when there's a gap, right, this is moderated by the various chemicals that could be released over here. Later you see it. So with different chemicals, that will account for various types of behaviors that you can have. Got it?
The space between the presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic cell is called the synaptic cleft. The presynaptic neuron contains signal molecules called neurotransmitters that are packaged inside vesicles. When an action potential reaches the end of
the so-called vesicles are just bubbles made in your cell body. Just now up there, right, that bulge, everything is manufactured there. They have various structures to produce all these chemicals, bubbles, all right, as vehicles. So they will, after that, right, all these neurotransmitters, the chemicals will be packaged in the bubbles and be sent down. Then they will all just be stored here, ready for use. Once they feel the electrical signal coming down, so they get triggered by the electricity, right? This thing will then work with calcium to fuse and release the chemicals towards the next cell.
The neuron, neurotransmitters are released by exocytosis from the neuron into the synaptic cleft. Neurotransmitters bind to the adjacent cell at receptor sites attached to ion channels. The channels open, allowing the movement of ions into or out of the effector cell, which alters its membrane potential, thereby transmitting the signal from the neuron to the effector cell. Because nerve impulses move very rapidly down the axon of a neuron and move from cell to cell across synapses, you react quickly to a stimulus, like burning your finger.
Okay, it is done. You will be able to access this, I think, by tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to do it later on. When you go home, right, or when you're at home, when you watch, please don't watch on Dropbox, download, all right, or you're going to jam somebody when using the resources. Download and watch at your leisure. First, get used to this. There are 4 parts to this. Lecture 3, video 1, 2, 3, 4 are all on neurons. At least the structure, the mechanism of neurons. This is what I suggest you do.
Alone contains about 100 billion nerve cells.
I think that's the previous being replayed. Just close it. We don't need it anymore. Okay. Yeah. So there are 4 videos on neurons. All right. There's introducing, the one you watch does not have the opening called neuron. It's introducing you to action potential and nervous conduction. Now, when you're home, watch maybe this video again so you get the information to sink in. Then you watch part 2, part 3, and part 4. Then they will all make sense. If you go too fast, most people are like that. When it's very technical and very new, they go too fast, they find it's very confusing. So it's better to watch once, twice, maybe even 3 times the one video, get used to it. You may not be able to remember all the terms, but you now can picture the flow and understand the concept, move on to the next one. So by the time you do this, then you find that everything makes sense once you complete the 4 videos. Okay? Next week, I will just do a quick recap on this, and I want to move on to, and not only next lesson, but future lessons will be about behavior at both the macroscopic level and how at the nervous level, it may actually be overriding your free will than not. Okay? But we need all these basic stuff so that you can appreciate what's coming later. Question? Okay, I see you all 2 weeks after. Don't come next week. Okay? Unless you have ang pao for me. And Happy New Year in advance, all of you who are celebrating.
Thanks, Mr. Lam.
Thank you, Mr. Lam. Happy New Year all. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Lam. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year too. Happy New Year too. Thank you, Kai. And Happy New Year in advance.